in a process that's been going on for 200 years. All that happened at the end of colonialism was the donor system took over. It just replaced it. And that's the mentality of Africa today, is wait until I've heard it, for the days of the missionaries.
Right.
And it's so inculcated. Plus, you have to understand that a society that's had its leadership purged for 200 years, literally murdered, has to have time for those people to grow back, new ones to grow, because they will. It's in human nature. And I've heard every excuse, from racism to the religious excuse, or the Hamitic race, and they're cursed, and you hear all that stuff. And my response is, okay, let's say you're right, they're cursed. Isn't it true? Because that's a Christian view. So isn't it true that in Christ all curses are broken? That's not true. And so we started seeing these great responses, and we introduced the open space piece. We jumped to about 100 communities within a year, and by 2007 I felt we had a real program. It doesn't cost anything, to do it. Really, we fund, all of Village Care is funded for about $15,000 a month. We now have 150,000 kids in programs. That's not 1/10% of the population. We're not making an impact yet. We just found it's something that works. And what I finally said around 2007 was two things. I have to figure out how this works, because it's just you have to go if you can. It's phenomenal. Taking a team in, we only allow this once a year now, but we're taking a team in July just to see some of the communities that are working, because I want people to. I like transparency and measurement. I'm big on that. But I thought when we got to 800 communities, we could start working toward global awareness, and that kind of happened last year. And so that's where I'm at right now with it. It works because there's 5 things. I do everything in sets of 5s. You might have noticed that already. It's not mystical. I can only count. And, Pythagoras said the same thing. If you ever read anything, mathematician, he was actually not a mathematician. That wasn't his trade. He was a philosopher, and he called it the divine formula. It was angles. There was a certain beauty, and I don't know that I buy it or not. I do know that I can drill into, when I'm drilling toward a core truth, I can usually break that down into 5 universal elements almost every time, where you don't need to add anything or take anything away. They become axiomatic. So here's what I figured out finally, because in 2006 I stopped. By then I'd realized, we need to get the donor out of the way, because something's happening here, and every time a donor shows up, even when I would show up just to see them, it would begin to deteriorate again. And it's white privilege and white presence, a powerful problem. Just showing up can really destroy something that's that fragile. But it was just curious as hell, how does this really work, and why does it work? And I found that there's sort of a principle of healthy community in there, and also principles of empowerment. And it was all on the empowerment thing, because I had to define empowerment. I remember starting out, I just went on Google, type in empowerment and see what it means. All you get are political definitions. So I defined empowerment as the more choices you can make for your own life, the more empowered you are. That's my definition of empowerment. So what happens really? Well, we found that what happens is we leave. 3 days, we have a guy there, and he leaves. We go back and check on them once in a while. And in 6 months, if they're still working, we have another program. We call it Outcomes for Business. Works the same way. It's a little different, but it's been very successful. We still don't allow any funding or loans. That's a 3rd program. I thought that was where we should do it, but it didn't work. So the 5 key elements turned out to be, I went to maybe 150 villages in 6 countries over a couple of years that were doing it successfully. I went to some that weren't working too, and those are all that's a funny thing, because it works or it doesn't. It's like on day 4, it either goes or it doesn't go at all. And that's just down to leadership. people either emerge to do stuff, somebody gets up and says, I'm going to do something, and what they have to answer on that third day, when they come back to report at the end of the day, is what am I going to do for myself? Because I realized one of the things I figured out is you have to identify self-interest. If you don't, you know, I don't want to keep knocking on the church here, but the church's feeling is, oh, we're all just here to help everybody, and we're all doing good for everybody, and so you in the village, you should do that too. It doesn't work. People have to take care of themselves, and they should. So rather than pretend that that's not an issue, I made it the first question. What am I going to do for myself? And what I've learned the first 2 days, what am I going to do for myself? The second question is, what am I going to do for my family? Because our target is that we want every child in the community to meet those 5 standards, not just the most vulnerable children. And then the third question is, what am I going to do for my community? Fourth question is, who am I going to do it with? The fifth question is, when are we going to get started? And they form little groups, and they start projects, and we saw businesses almost instantly emerge from that. It's been a really, I could go on for hours on that, but I think we've counted maybe 8,000 small businesses have emerged. We have a group in Tanzania this year. I started 3 years ago there with 13 widows. And this year they built a hydroelectric project, and they still haven't gotten any funding. So,
wow.
I mean, and I had a team with me. We videoed it because it was, and you could tell it was African. It wasn't, somebody hadn't funded, I mean, there was a crooked tunnel, you know. And it was an amazing story. There's 250 women in their group now, and they have 4 fish farms and herds of goats, and they started with 13 women, and they could put together enough money to buy 10 chickens 3 years ago. It was just a remarkable story. And there's a lot of them like that, you know. So getting back to my point, here's what happens. And it happens in us. We just don't see it. It happens in everybody. You have to initiate, you're the guy, they have to get up the next morning when we're gone, and they have to get started. They have to be the initiators. They have to own it to their heart. See, if you're just handing, that's why collaborations don't work in Africa, because they're still not owning it. They have to own it. So it's initiation. Innovation is huge. You know, as long as we're funding it, they don't have to figure it out. And believe me, if you went into some of those villages, you look around thinking, they don't have a chance in hell. There's no way this is going to work. And it works every time. Because innovation is in the human heart. And we have it here, it's sort of the American way. But in Africa, it's literally been beaten out of the system. You don't move in Africa without somebody's permission. Believe me, it's still that way. And what that program does, it allows them to realize for the first time they actually can make their own decisions. And they're so small in these little groups that they're not on the radar of the local leadership or the systems. They're not on the radar. So they're not being, everybody's happy. And we've learned to give credit to those other people. So nobody gets in their way because it's not costing anybody anything. And they start these little projects. And they go back in that system, and then they're doing the 5 practices. They're focused on the children. We have a little scoring program they're keeping. Our coordinators collect the information. We go back and vet it with teams once in a while from the African universities. And so it's initiation, innovation, building. The first project they have to build it themselves. It's like making your kid build that, little car. They got to build it themselves. They need to see it work. Then you have to maintain it, and then you have to grow or replicate or die. That's how business works. It's how life works. And what happens is here's what the donors do. And even when this phrase, I know you all love this phrase. I hate it. Teach a man, give a man a fish he eats for a day. Teach a man to fish he eats for a lifetime. The problem is that's not what we do. We'll go in and buy the fishing line, we'll supply the boats, we'll build the school, we'll put them through the school, we'll supply the boats, and we'll put them on the lake and say, okay, now you can fish for your own food. And of course those programs fail 100% of the time. Our program doesn't offer anything. It's like, hey, you sign up, figure it out. So they're
You
building.
gotta wanna fish.
Yeah, so, and well, and, you know, but anyway, so they're digging pit latrines, they're improving their sanitation, they're planting organic crops. I couldn't figure this out for years, how to get, you know, we're having a problem with nutrition, and again, I'm doing my white thing, and we have all these pictures that we're giving them, and we're trying to explain stuff. And finally I get to this community one day, and they got it nailed. I mean, they got little drawings they've made up on their wall, and what day of the week they eat what and everything. And who did this? And well, we did it. And I couldn't figure out quite how to put it together. And they said, well, and I said, well, how does it work? He said, colors. It works with colors. And what do you mean? We eat a different colored vegetable every day. And we get everything we need.
That's how I promote my nutrition practice.
It
Eat
just
all
blew
the
me away.
colors of- eat all
It
the
blew me
colors of the
away.
rainbow.
It blew me away. Yeah. And so they figured it out. So we spread that out, and that's what we do when we see something work. We just get the word out. You know, we adapt and send out the information so the leaders can disseminate it. And then building the smallest things, from a pit latrine to a garden to, you know, a traditional home in the right way, you name it. And we've seen those things scale up in ways we didn't imagine. I'm not saying that's the answer, by the way. I think we've achieved something phenomenal in getting them to a certain level. We're not by any means finished here. But then